program. So I think we'll switch now. Um, Shlomo, if you want to get started trying to share, if you have something to share, slides. So Shlomo Muller has studied psychology and continues to study psychology at Brooklyn College. He has organized some very nice videos on our history, Big Bang to 2025, on a YouTube site. He's also tried to organize a discussion group online. And so very active in that. I know he was trying to find a master's program in big history and a hard time doing so. And this should be something that we're concerned with, that a lot of the programs kind of big history alone kind of went down, but maybe connections to other disciplines, like John just said, might be of interest. But let's go ahead and thank Shlomo Muller for his talk now. Why don't you go ahead?
Thanks, Dave. And I'll just take the opportunity to mention that if anyone knows of any PhD opportunities in big history, do let me know. I've been reaching out to people. I'm finishing my MA in history right now. So my topic is something that has intrigued me from the first time that I encountered David Christian's work, which is how I got introduced to big history, which is that big history is trying to tell the story of everything. It's trying to tell a cosmic story. But once you get past the first 380,000 years of the universe, once you get past the cosmic microwave background, we really lose sight of that. And I think that we could do a much better job with that. So I'm going to suggest the path towards that, although I should mention that that there are a lot of ways of doing this. And I'm just trying to put forth a way in which we can start thinking about it and introducing Christian's thresholds in particular more cosmically. So to elaborate on the issue is that most students are encountering big history when they initially encounter it through a very tunnel-hole vision. They learn about the universe, they start learning about the universe, and they get a sense that we're going to learn about the entirety of history. But soon we're not talking about that. So the way Christian goes is you have the Big Bang, and already by the time we're talking about stars, you're going to have an introduction to perhaps the HR diagram and then just talk about the sun. So starting there and going past that, I think that we could do a much better job. And I think that this is important for giving people the origin story sense, the mythological sense of belonging to the larger picture. I think that when you don't tell this, it's a much more decontextualized story. And while it offers much broader context than conventional history, it doesn't offer the cosmic context that it promises and that, more importantly, it can offer. I'm going to focus on the early stages of big history, and I'll explore a little later why it's a lot more problematic to deal with this topic once you get to life, and especially beyond life, to humans and beyond. So when it comes to addressing this issue, I want to briefly address something about the Big Bang. This isn't my most important point. This is kind of a take it or leave it, and for multiple reasons. One, because of the esotericness of the Big Bang and the esotericness of multiverses, but also because big historians actually are much better at this. And by big historians, I'm not really talking about the content that you'll find in the Journal of Big History. I'm talking about most students are encountering the Big History Project, the Crash Course Big History on YouTube, Khan Academy's Big History, I think there are two textbooks for big history for high schools, Between Nothing and Everything, and then more recently, The Evolution of Everything. And in all of those sources, you're getting incredibly tunnel-hole visions. And I'm going to focus on David Christian's thresholds because that's the main way that it's generally approached. So when it comes to the Big Bang, I think that it's important to not convey an unjustified pre-Copernican sense of our universe. It's important to mention the basic philosophical reality that we're working our way back based off data in our detectable universe, and we're not really opining about beyond that. And it's beyond that. If you want to get scientific, you might have specific things to say, but at the very least, you have a philosophical riddle there. It shouldn't lead to a pre-Copernican sense or a post-Copernican sense until we know about multiverses. But that space should be filled with ambiguity and curiosity, not, oh, just our universe. And oh my God, how amazing it is that our universe out of nowhere popped into existence. We don't know out of nowhere. We don't know where it is. We don't know if those words make sense. But more to the point of the specific work that where I think this approach gets more concrete is once we move beyond the cosmic microwave background. Once we move beyond the cosmic microwave background, rather than talking about stars, we should immediately jump to the cosmic web. We should immediately talk about the fact that when you look at the cosmic microwave background, you're seeing these energy differentials. And if you move forward, you start seeing those energy differentials. This is obviously a dark matter model increasing. And this is the cosmic web in this image is what it's supposed to look like 200 million years into history. So soon after the first stars get going. And I think that that's very helpful to bring the story forward from the cosmic microwave background in a cosmic way still. And you get to in the context of the cosmic web, you now get to introduce the fact that the cosmic web is taking form and within it are emerging stars and galaxies. And you can start that conversation with the cosmic context. Now, when it comes to the history of stars, I think we should start with stars rather than galaxies, although I don't know how clear that is from the structural formation perspective. I'm just coming from the perspective that stars are the bricks that make up galaxies, so it's intuitive to start with the stars. And one amazing way of telling the cosmic history of star formation comes from this plot from 2014 McDowell and Dickinson article where they go through what the star formation rate is throughout history. And suddenly, instead of focusing on the sun, although obviously you want to get there, you can start talking about stars started being born, let's say, around 100 million years into history. Those first stars are population 3 stars. Here are their characteristics. And stars are being born from then on at an increasing rate up until about 3.5 billion years into history, and they've been decreasing in formation rate ever since, although given that stars die relatively infrequently, the accumulation is increasing across time. And you can go more thorough into this. You could give context for when 50% of sun-like stars have been born and stuff like that. To then bring it to our individual stars context. But I actually want to go in the other direction, which is that after introducing stars in their cosmic history, introduce how stars appear to us nowadays. Namely, they generally don't appear as lone stars. They appear in binary or trinary pairs, which appear in groups, which appear in clusters, which appear in galaxies, which appear in clusters of galaxies, which appear in superclusters of galaxies. And suddenly you've introduced the galaxy conversation. You've gone from stars to introduce the galaxy conversation. And over here, we can start talking about, I think it's incredibly helpful to show this Hubble binoculars diagram to get a basic sense of the galaxies that are around. And immediately, once introducing these types of galaxies, the ellipticals, the lenticulars, and the spirals, and the peculiars, it opens the opportunity to telling their cosmic history. So in the past, there were much more galaxies. They were denser. The galaxies that are around now that are the same mass as early galaxies are less dense than they were. There were many more. They were merging at much higher rates. They're overwhelmingly peculiar. So they're overwhelmingly peculiar. They're merging at higher rates. Their merger rate increases across time for massive galaxies peaking around 2.6 billion years into history, for smaller galaxies peaking across 2.6 to 4.3 billion years into history. And from 2 billion years on, you get less and less peculiars across time, and the distribution of galaxies start looking more and more like the distribution of galaxies that we see now. You have much more spheroidal and disk-like galaxies become 50% of all total galaxies by 4.3 billion years into history. So you see the general story going forward. And this is a way to bring cosmic galactic history into the big history conversation. I'd suggest that David Christian's second threshold should be stars, galaxies, and it shouldn't be sun, although that should come. Milky Way should also come, or rather should actually be the topic of stars and galaxies. Moving forward, I don't think that the making of heavier elements should be a threshold. It doesn't really make sense philosophically because the way that Christian has it, it's more or less synonymous with the history of stars. And I'd also argue that it shouldn't be the creation of heavier elements as much as chemical evolution writ large, which obviously takes place in the Big Bang era. It takes place in the it takes place alongside the evolution of stars, but it also takes place when it comes to minerals and molecules in particular, most particularly on planets. So I don't think that it makes sense chronologically or conceptually to have chemical complexity separate. And as Andre and Dave pointed out in a recent paper from January 2025 on the Siluriferous era, um, the history of cosmic chemical complexity actually correlates to no small extent with the history of star formation. You have a bit of a lag, but you have metallicity increases across time, and that generic story can and should be told, but it should be subsumed into um, other thresholds. When it comes to the fourth threshold, but for me, the third threshold, planetary formation, there's less work on this, and the work on this is more theoretical than a lot of the work on the history of stars. But we do have work on the historical planet formation rate. This graph is coming from a 2024 paper, which is looking at the two most common types of planets and approaching it semi-empirically to give a timeline. And similar to stars, you see an increase and you see a ventral decrease, while a peak and a decrease. It starts decreasing around 4.6 billion years into history, um, and going on from there. And like stars, you have the increasing formation rate, but the accumulation across time is continuing. And you can also talk about those first planets. There's what to say about the fact that the arguments that scientists have that the first planets are they're bigger, they're closer to their host star. And you can start talking about that as soon as, well, between 100 and 200 million years into history. By 225 million years into history, you have the dominant star type being born are population two stars. And population two stars are thought to be able to house planets. And although it seems like planet formation rate would be lower for population two stars than for population three stars. And similar to with stars, you can make points about, for example, 80% of Earth-like planets had formed by the time Earth had formed. And such things are a little fraught because different researchers define Earth-like planets in different ways, and you have to accommodate for that. The scientific basis for this approach is sound. There's no question that there's a broader story. As for why big historians have fallen into this path of sort of a great man version of history with the sun and Earth's life, is a broader question, but it's not controversial to say that this story exists. I think that the uncertainty arises from two things. One, a lot of it hasn't been covered thoroughly. For example, you'll notice that when I spoke about the history of galaxies, I spoke about the different types across time, but I didn't say that about the history of stars. And there's much less work on the actual, what are the demographic distribution of stars across time. And worse still, for someone like me and for many big historians, I'm personally trained in history, but whatever your specialization is, assuming it's not astronomy or perhaps physics, um, it can be difficult to parse the relevant material, and therefore demanding that big historians expand their perspective and make it more cosmic can be incredibly problematic for us working in it. I think that there are a lot of benefits. For me, the biggest benefit is just existential satiation. I think that this is more mythical. If you're trying to tell an origin story, you should give the cosmic context, and this will that's better at performing the mythological function that big history ought to offer. But also, in general, by insisting on telling this whole story, our actual gaps in telling the whole story will become a lot clearer. And it's going to break a lot of the parochial tendencies where a big history student will leave a big history class knowing almost nothing about galaxies, about the evolution of galaxies or galaxy types, and so on. However, this approach it inevitably forces you to focus more on a larger context, and that might lead to spending too little time on a smaller context. And if you just spend your time talking about the larger context, arguably it's even worse than just spending your time on the smaller context, because at the end of the day, we are more closely tied to that more parochial context. And also by insisting on telling the broader story, especially in areas where scientists haven't actually laid out a coherent version of it, this can lead to speculative and inaccurate thinking. When it comes to integrating with other parts of big history, I think that chronologically, it's very difficult to integrate this with thresholds six onward, human civilizations and industrial revolution. Like it's very difficult. The conversation around cosmic evolution focuses on life. There is conversation about that, and you can at least begin that, although life is probably a lot more idiosyncratic than planets. But moving beyond that, I don't know. I'd have to see it tried, but I suspect that you lose more than you gain by trying to compare civilizations to other evolution of life on other planets.
We're close to 15 minutes.
Thanks. And it definitely can be integrated with other approaches from big historians, and most particularly David Christian's thresholds. It lines up with Christian's threshold. It's actually inspired by and mirroring Christian's thresholds. It's inspired my frustration with Christian's thresholds. Although I should say, like, without Christian's thresholds, I wouldn't have been able to start thinking about cosmic history to begin with. So there's no doubt that it's incredibly valuable. And one can take it or leave it on my broader point holds whether or not you want to take out threshold three. You could leave in threshold three and tell a cosmic story of that. I just don't think it really makes sense for reasons independent of making the story more cosmic. So I'm going to try to incorporate this idea more further and see how practical it is. I'm going to try to make a video for my channel where I just focus on, okay, what is the cosmic history for the first 3/4 thresholds. I also, given my historical background, I plan on sending my work to some of you guys and hoping that you might offer some feedback that your expertise lends itself to. And I was particularly inspired I read in Cynthia Stokes Brown's book about how Walter Alvarez in the 1990s arranged a group of big historians for a symposium or something of the sort where they learned the relevant geological sciences to big history. And I think that something that the International Big History Association is particularly well positioned to do is we have tons of big historians who are experts in different fields, and we could communicate a lot more in bringing this information forward, where a physicist could help educate us non-physicists on the relevant science that we need to know and where the science has moved over the past year or however often we might do such a thing. And I think such conferences or symposium would be incredibly helpful for me, but also for many of us. Thanks so much for your time.
All right. Thank you very much, Shlomo. That was excellent. Andre?
Yes. No, Shlomo, I'm very impressed by your presentation. No, I was I since quite long ago I was always a bit bothered with most of big history accounts, which tend to forget about the rest of the universe as soon as the Earth appears, and it was not clear how to mend this defect. And what you suggest is very realistic ways. No, because really, no, some big history accounts in some respects resembled medieval chronicles, which often called world histories, which started with the creation of the universe, but then 90% of the chronicle is occupied by the story of northwest France, etc. But what you suggest is how to mend this defect, how to make big history really big history. And I think David and I will agree with me that we are starting preparing third volume of our big history series. So we would invite you to contribute. What you are suggesting would fit our third volume. It will be about phase transition in universal complexity growth, but what you're suggesting, it is very relevant, so you're very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's incredibly encouraging to hear that from someone as well established in the field as you are. And obviously the paper that you wrote with Dave on the stelliferous era and your more recent paper on the Earth in the context of the solar system was intriguing for me when preparing for this article.
Excellent. Very good.
Oh,
Thank
also, I
you.
just wanted to echo what you mentioned about medieval histories. When I was studying world histories, it very much struck me as similarly. This, how we approach it, a bit how the Western Civ version of world history, where you just jump immediately to things that the things that are most relevant to your narrative about your version of human history.
Excellent. Very good. Gerard, want to unmute?
Microphone.
Sorry again. Oh, I'm
Yes.
learning slowly. Uh, you talk about thresholds and about, I think, statistical distributions of formation of like galactic phenomena, like galaxies and stars and planets. What I found interesting of your distribution idea is that you could make a very long time scale and then plot all the distributions on that, so that you see galaxies coming and disappearing, and then the stars forming in that and disappearing, and then the planets coming and disappearing, which is, of course, broadening and broadening every time, because if the stars explode and form new stars, the stellar period in which you find stars in the universe is sort of getting broader and broader statistically. So that was just a thought I had when I heard your talk. And then the other thing was you're talking about thresholds as if you would like to get rid of them. Well, in terms of this distribution idea along a very broad timeline, I think you're right. Things have a distribution. Um, when it comes to is there a first atom in the universe? You could actually say, yeah, it's a moment in the distribution where hardly anything has happened, but this is the point where it happens. We never know what that point could be, but in a structural sense, the entering of atoms or molecules in the universe um, indicates maybe not so much a threshold, because that may be hard to pin down, but it indicates a phase shift in the type of organization that we can find for the small things. And I hope to later in this Congress, video Congress, to say a little bit about that, that we can discuss it.
I'm looking forward. I'm definitely very sympathetic to approaches that phase out the threshold approach, to borrow phase. Um, there, but at the same time, I'm hopeful that as we tell a deeper and broader big history, those approaches will naturally arise. We'll see patterns and we'll see opportunities. Because, like I mentioned, I do think, especially for novices, when you're introducing big history, it's important to give them something to hold on to. And if you're just going to bombard an infinite amount of facts from the Big Bang onward, I think you'll lose them in a way that David Christian doesn't lose them. But nonetheless, I'm very sympathetic to maturing out of it.
Yeah, that just as a response on this, maybe it could help us if we separate all the things that occur in the universe, because that's everything, and try to establish like a large thing series and a small thing series. And then there's, of course, the big question, what do you call small and large? But
Excellent. Thank you. Todd?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Shlomo. That was very thought-provoking, and I really appreciate your keeping our attention focused on the full cosmic perspective. Um, and so I just a thought that comes to mind in the what you were saying about integrating the unique that's local to that full cosmic perspective. That I always find that the students, so I teach cosmology classes, astronomy cosmology classes, and sort of come the other direction of trying to bring the human side of the big history into that. And the students are always really struck by the connection between looking out in space and looking back in time, that the layers in time are the layers as we look out in space. So you might already be doing this, but one thing you might consider is adding, like when you show the plot of star formation rate or planet formation rate over time, is then you can show images from those distances that actually give a sample of like, here are a bunch of stars forming at this era in the graph to sort of make it concrete. Anyway, so I just thank you for your presentation. That was really good.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea, and I'm definitely going to try to incorporate it into my paper.
About 6 minutes before those, want to take a break.
So very good. So could you say something about the discussion group that you tried to get going? It looked like it was working for a while there.
I'm sorry, discussion group? The Walter Alvarez thing that I mentioned at the end, or something else?
Wasn't there something online in 2024?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think I mentioned this. Are you the Big History meetup?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I did host the Big History meetup for a bit. Um, and it fell off not because it was just meetup.com. The topic was Big History. The various people would show up. Just got like 5 to 10 people for my first 3 events, I think. And we would just read an article from the Journal of Big History that I chose that, yeah, and then discuss that article. And the conversations went very well. It was a very mixed bag of, you got a lot of non-scientific gobbledygook there, because it's meetup, anyone's showing up. But nonetheless, the conversations were very interesting. I did it in part to beef up my resume in the hope of getting into a grad program in Big History. But unfortunately, it all collapsed. I broke my ankle at a certain point, and I've let it fall apart ever since. So it's been probably a year or some such since I've held an event. But they were very fruitful, and definitely a great way to, in the conversation of bringing it to the public and interacting with the public, it was doing that on a small way. My YouTube channel is also doing that in a small way. Um, and yeah, the people were interested. Like people were spontaneously showing up. I had a different book club that I was running that was getting much fewer people showing up. So it's exciting for people.
And how did you kind of publicize it or get people to join?
I didn't really. I mean, Meetup offers some, I think, like boosting opportunities. I'm not sure about that, but I didn't do anything like that. Yeah, I didn't really promote it. Obviously, I mentioned it to friends and family, but for the most part, it was just people stumbling across it on Meetup and just joining and seeing an event pop up.
Huh. Oh, very interesting. Very
If you,
good.
if you do it again, you ought to get an ad in Emergence. I would have loved to join, but didn't know.
Awesome, thanks.
All right. Very good. Well, thank you very much, Shlomo. Very, very interesting, very exciting things to cover.